Hey guys, this is Josh from Grapplezilla, and today we have an amazing guest, Mr. Tyson LaRone. He is an amazing jiu-jitsu. He's a kickboxing instructor, a strongman. He is one of the most intelligent guys I've met. I've been following him on Instagram. He's a great personal, I wouldn't say personal trainer, strength and conditioning coach, but at the high level, his stuff works. Tyson, how you doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm fantastic, man. So I want to get down to something. What's your martial arts background? I know you're really good at a lot of different things, but tell me what do you do?
Well, I was a swimmer for about 10 years, competing in swimming. And then, when I hit 15, as a lot of swimmers do, just, it's a heavy schedule. You want to be good at swimming. You're in the pool about 25 hours a week. Once I hit 15, passion starts to wane, you quit. But then all of a sudden I've got a 25-hour hole in my life. And, it was great doing nothing for about 1 week. And then I started going crazy. So I was looking for the next thing. And, that was in about 2002. So I was interested in martial arts for a long time before that, just never had the time because I was too busy with swimming. But at that time, my plan was to join the military. Once I graduated high school, my plan was to join the military. My dream actually at that time was to be a Joint Task Force 2 operator, JTF2, which people aren't familiar. It's basically Canada's special forces. They're Tier 1 special forces. So when I was 15, that was my dream, right? So when I went into martial arts, I didn't originally go into martial arts thinking I was going to want to fight in MMA or do any of this stuff. I was thinking that I wanted to pursue something that would be applicable to police, security, military, whatever path I ended up going with. So I ended up doing a style called Kito-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, which people might not be as familiar with the traditional Japanese styles, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu came from Judo. Matsuo Maeda was a judo master who taught the Gracie family. That's sort of how BJJ got started. And Kano Shigoro, the man who created Judo, trained in two different styles before that, Tenshin Shinryu and Kito-Ryu. So it's a very old style of traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. So that's where I started because my instructor there was a police officer. He'd been kind of in the trenches, that sort of thing. He had a lot of great material on subdue and arrest and all that stuff. So I thought it was a great fit. A lot of my training partners were military and police, so it was the perfect place for me to be. So I was training there, and I was also doing Kyokushin karate with another gentleman, also military background. He was an immigrant from Poland, and in Poland, he had been an operator and then instructor in their anti-terrorist special forces unit in Warsaw. So he was very influential in my striking background, my Kyokushin karate. I trained with him for a while, and he also taught us some of the knife fighting material and close quarters combat material that he'd done in the special forces. At that time, I also started studying Japanese swordplay because it was recommended to us that for Kito-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, Kito-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu was designed to be used in full armor. So that's how it sort of differed from other styles at the time that were maybe designed to be done on mats and in gis. Kito-Ryu was done with full armor, so it was recommended that we train in swordplay to sort of overlap some of those fundamental movements that might should be shared and kind of deepen our understanding of the unarmed tactics. And so I fell in love with that. That's been a passion of mine for the last 22 years as well. So Kito-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, Kyokushin karate, military martial arts, and I did that for about 4 years, just all week. I basically lived at those dojos. But that's when I started getting more interested in MMA. That was so I started competing tournaments and stuff like that. But more and more, I started to realize that at the end of the day, like I was able to make what I did work for pankration and jiu-jitsu and these kinds of tournaments. But eventually, you come to the realization that if you want to get serious about it, you got to do the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai that everyone else is doing, right? So that's when I switched to training under Professor Mike Yakulik at Arashino Martial Arts. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai ever since then. So my current sort of classes that I teach are my style of kickboxing, which I call Kaiten hybrid kickboxing, which is a mix of Kyokushin and Muay Thai. And then I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I also teach a class called Modern Budo, where I teach sword and knife fighting. So it's been a very long 22-year journey of studying a lot of different styles, and I'm still learning. I always tell people, like, I've been a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since October of 2013, and so I passed the sort of marker a while ago where I had been a black belt for longer than it took me to get my black belt. And that's always kind of a moment of self-reflection for a black belt. It's like, okay, well, now I got to what a lot of people think of as the finish line, and now I've been a black belt for 10 years, and I always say, like, the amount that I have learned since I got my black belt, exponentially more than how much I learned getting to black belt. Like, there's kind of a cliche where black belt's just the beginning. For me, that really has been the case, because I'm always looking for that next thing to sort of learn and grow and try to expand my knowledge, and then cross train to different things, bring that back to jiu-jitsu, see how it can affect things. So that's I guess the short version of my martial arts background.
Man, that's quite an amazing background, because you have the traditional arts, but you have all the like hardcore combative traditional arts, like the ones that like were used on the battlefield. I didn't know that. I remember Ketara Jiu-Jitsu. From one thing that was interesting was Black Belt magazine years ago put them as the school of the month. I remember I
Yeah.
was such a nerd, and I was like,
I love
wow, it
Black
is.
Belt magazine, man. Those ones
Yeah,
from the 70s that are advertising like the Chuck Norris stretchy jeans where you can high kick people in a street fight.
yeah. And so ultimately, the thing that brought you to start jiu-jitsu was in order to go to a more combative, modern combatives, which would be MMA,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So I fought in MMA several times. Just super sketchy early 2000s Alberta MMA. Guys like photocopying their CT scans because they knew they wouldn't pass one otherwise. Like, it was, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was basically right before the sort of explosion in popularity. Like, that was right around like 2005, 2006 was around when the kind of first season of The Ultimate Fighter got started. So that's I got in just right before everyone else got in.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of interesting. There's like a flare up of jiu-jitsu popularity in like 1993 with UFC 1. That's when a lot of kind of the OGs got into it in the States and Canada. And then another flare up in when the season 1 of The Ultimate Fighter happened. Right, I got in sort of just before the second flare up of jiu-jitsu popularity. So at that time, I was training under, again, Professor Mike Yaklik. When I started training under Professor Mike Yaklik, he was a purple belt. And at that time, like in Alberta, it was like, man, he's a purple belt? That's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
if you heard somebody was a blue belt, like a legit blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like, you bring that guy in for a seminar. Like, it was a really different time. Tournaments, not even remotely comparable to what they are today. I mean, back, when I first started doing jiu-jitsu tournaments, I'd drive to Lethbridge 5 hours to do like an in-house grappling tournament at Lee Meehan's gym there. But and it was all MMA fighters, right? And if you were doing jiu-jitsu, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, in like 2002, 2003, or up to probably, I would say, up to like 2008, 2009 is really when people started to get more interested in just the sport of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Now, like, I go to a tournament in Red Deer, and there's like 800 people in the tournament, and
Wow.
and most of them have never even been involved in MMA, right? So we're hitting a kind of a tipping point now where it's way past the time that I started, where really the only people who were training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu were MMA fighters, or people who use it for their jobs, like people who are police, security,
Yeah.
military. Like they all got on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu train pretty early. But other than that, it was just MMA fighters. You go to a Jiu-Jitsu tournament, it was just pretty much all MMA fighters. But now you go to most Jiu-Jitsu tournaments, there's way more people, and we're now kind of several generations removed from when just the sport of Jiu-Jitsu started getting more popular. And that's made so many changes, right? Some good, some bad, but that's the reality of the evolution of any sport, right? This happened with judo, right? In 1905, when Matsuo Maeda, the judo master, was teaching the Gracie family, right? In 1905, jiu-jitsu and judo were exactly the same, right? But then you get this sort of split evolution where you get the judo that existed in 1905 in Brazil being adapted for street fighting and vale tudo and MMA, and in Japan it's following this completely different path where they're starting to try to sort of make it more exciting and more palatable as a sport to try to get it into the Olympics. So this happened with judo as well. And again, some people love the path that judo took, some people lament it, and it's always you're never going to make everybody happy with how the martial arts and the sport evolve.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with you. I remember I was looking at your background because your martial arts studio is called
Ironside, yeah.
Ironside. Now that's a great name, by the way, because if people know and they've seen you lifting these huge everything, they're gonna understand. And what I noticed is you do the type of jiu-jitsu that I'm a huge fan of, which is more towards the street and self-defense. So tell me about that. Why did you go that? I mean, of course you covered it, but why that direction? And you still go that direction?
Well, it's partly due to who I trained under, because in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the beginning, it was pretty much exclusively a self-defense martial art. And this is one of the reasons why it's so funny when you hear people online say, "Oh, jiu-jitsu is not good for street fighting. You don't want to be on the ground when you street fight." Like it's they like we're so far removed from that sort of original application of Brazilian jiu-jitsu that there are people now who are just hearing about Brazilian jiu-jitsu for the first time that think it's just a sport. But what actually happened was there was the jiu-jitsu that was taught by Matsuo Maeda to the Gracie family. And that gets confusing sometimes for people that they're like, well, if he did judo and what he taught them was judo, then why is it called jiu-jitsu? But at that time, what a lot of people don't realize is that at that time in Japan, even judo wasn't always called judo. Like people didn't make a distinction between judo and jujutsu the way that we do now. Even Kano Jigoro, who's the creator of judo, people sometimes refer to what he taught as Kano Jujutsu, not judo. So he wanted to make it judo because he felt that jujutsu made it sound like it was more of just a combative martial art. And he wanted to promote judo as something that was more of a sort of way of life and a way of personal growth. So he felt that changing the name of the martial art to judo, like the way instead of technique or application or style, would make people think of it differently, right? So he wanted to call it judo, but a lot of people just called it Kano Jujutsu. So when Matsuo Maeda was traveling around, he called what he did jujutsu because a lot of people in Japan would have, and then jiu-jitsu, Jitsu, how the Brazilians say it, it's a stylistic sort of linguistic difference. It's not a difference in what the word means. So at that time, it was judo that was being taught for self-defense, and that's basically what it was, and that's how it evolved, that's how it adapted, and that was the core focus of the martial art. Now, when they started competing, the reason why they would compete was for two things. Number one, to give themselves a way to train the macro skills of self-defense against 100% resistance. And that's really important for self-defense training. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was really judo that was applied for self-defense. And that was the number one reason why you would train it. And when they competed, the reason why they would compete with the sort of rule set that they did was so that they could train their macro skills of self-defense against 100% resistance. That's why they would roll. That's why they would do randori. That's why they would do tournaments. Like that was it. And that's why. So they would use the sport of jiu-jitsu. They would use the rolling and the sparring as a way to train the macro skills of self-defense. Just controlling a human being that is trying not to be controlled. They would do that against 100% resistance, and that's what you need for self-defense. Right? There's a spectrum. Right? There's a spectrum over here where you go too far this way, and it's all sport, and it's not really applicable to the street. It's against 100% resistance, but it's not applicable. You're not attacking each other in a way that's going to give you positive correlation to how you're likely to be attacked in a street fight. Right? Taekwondo comes to mind. Right? Taekwondo is a very impressive sport to watch. Like their sense of range and their sense of timing and their athleticism, it's all amazing. But the rules of the sport do not encourage that positive correlation to street fighting, right? Because you're not allowed to kick below the waist. There's no grappling. There's no clinch. You can punch, but punches aren't scored as highly as kicks. So to excel at the sport, it incentivizes you to focus on the kicks, right? So, kicking above the waist is basically what the sport is. So yes, it's against 100% resistance, but it goes too far to that side of the spectrum. Then there's the other side of the spectrum, which a lot of people think is better, but it's not, which is that you go too far to the self-defense training for real life kind of guys that are like, oh, our techniques are too deadly to spar. They're too deadly to drill. So we got to do cooperative drilling and that's it. That's not good either. Because if you could train in a martial art like that, where you don't spar, you don't drill, you don't do anything. And I always talk about it. I always use the analogy of baseball. You could learn how to swing a baseball bat by just swinging a baseball bat by yourself 100 times, right? But if you want to be good at baseball, as soon as reasonably possible, you need to have somebody pitching the ball to you trying to strike you out, because the first few times you do that, you're going to suck at it. Everyone does, right? So I don't think that swinging the bat by yourself 1,000 times or 10,000 times or 100,000 times is going to make it any different. You're still going to suck the first few times that somebody tries to strike you out. So you get these guys that are black belts in swinging a bat by themselves, claiming that they're a black belt in baseball. And it's really unfortunate, because you got a guy, maybe he's been training in martial arts for 10 years, but if that guy gets in a fight, he's trying to use his techniques against resistance for the first time in the middle of a street fight, when his adrenaline is pumping, he's getting exhausted, his mind is going blank because he's scared, he's nervous, right? You won't be able to apply those techniques that you worked so hard on, right? So cooperative technical work obviously is the first step, right? You got to get the steps down, right? But as soon as reasonably possible, you need to be working against resistance so that you know how the human body is actually going to feel when it's trying not to be controlled at 100%. So you have to find this balance, right? You can't train things like, oblique kicks through the knee and stuff like that against resistance, obviously, because it's too dangerous, right? I always say that you're not gonna learn to play the piano very well if you destroy your piano every time you play it, right? So you have to find the balance of, okay, let's get creative with how we could take this self-defense technique, which in its pure form is maybe too dangerous to train, but we can do like 80% of it safely against resistance. Okay, maybe we just focus on being able to maintain the position where we would use the technique, right? So if I can, hold you against the wall effectively, and you're just trying to get off the wall, okay, maybe that macro skill is enough because I can train that against 100% resistance. That now I know that I can create the opportunity for myself to use the technique. So we can't train the whole technique against 100% resistance, but we can train most of it. Okay. So that's why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is so effective for street fighting, is because we have found creative ways to train as much of the self-defense technique as we can against 100% resistance. So when you look at the sport, that was really all the sport was about. The sport was about giving people an opportunity to train their macro skills of self-defense against 100% resistance, and then compete with other schools to see, okay, who's teaching better material. Because if our student beats your student at this tournament format, which we've sort of agreed is the best way to show whose self-defense techniques are better, then our school's better, right? So it's that clashing of the sort of traditional dojo storming mentality with modern scientific approach to martial arts, right? Let's see what actually works. We're not going to guess what works. We're not going to say, well, we're going to do this technique because that's the technique we've been doing for 2,000 years. We're going to say, okay, let's just smash these techniques against each other and actually see if they work. That's a very modern approach to martial arts. So that's what it was for a long time. And even the rules that we play with jiu-jitsu, you can see that self-defense component, because basically what the rules do is they incentivize me to close the distance, take you down, pass your guard, pin you, submit you. And in a street fight, that's one-on-one. That's basically the way you want to do it, right? If there's the possibility of multiple opponents, that you don't want to be on the ground. But that is where the other side of it comes in. Because if I'm trying to take you down to the ground, you are training not to be taken to the ground. If I'm trying to pin you and hold you on the ground, you are training not to be held down, right? Okay. So once you've been doing that for a couple of years, you're going on blue belt, all of a sudden, the chances of some random person with no training on the street being able to put you on the ground and keep you on the ground if you don't want to be there, forget it. It's impossible, right? So that is why the sport rules sort of evolved the way they did. It was to encourage people to train and roll and spar in a way that would have positive correlation, where it's like, okay, you now have the tools to put somebody on the ground, go down on the ground and control them if you want to, not go down on the ground and control them if you want to. If you don't want to be on the ground, you don't have to be, right? You control the distance that the fight is fought at. That's the whole point. So the idea of the modern sport approach to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I believe you wanted to talk about, where the sport has gone. And
yes, exactly.
I'm kind of getting to that organically, nicely. But people don't realize, they're like, oh, there's, how do you add striking to jiu-jitsu, right? How do you add, the considerations of concrete and walls and weapons and multiple opponents? How do we add those to jiu-jitsu? It's like, no, Brazilian jiu-jitsu already had that. That is something that has been taken out of Brazilian jiu-jitsu over time. It's not something that was never there and now we have to put it in, right? So for me, coming from the sort of Kitaryu Jiu-Jitsu background already made me very interested in self-defense. Like that's why I started doing martial arts. So for me, that was always very interesting. And then going to train under Professor Mike, we were affiliated with Master Silvio Bering. Now, at that time, he was Professor Silvio Bering. He was only a 4th degree black belt when I started training with Professor Mike. But that was, to us, that was a like I say, a blue belt is someone you'd bring in for a seminar in Alberta MMA at that time. There were maybe 2 or 3 black belts in Alberta at the time. It's like a 4th degree black belt from Brazil was like a unicorn. But the thing with Master Silvio Bering is that he's had some very successful students in the sport of jiu-jitsu. Like he's the one who gave Fabrizio Verdun his black belt. So he's had some students who are very successful in the sport of MMA and the sport of jiu-jitsu, but his main focus is self-defense. So, from the top down, being a part of that affiliation, right? You're always going to have people who just do jiu-jitsu because they want to roll, right? But if you were training at any Silvio Berding affiliate, you at least had to take self-defense seriously enough that you could demonstrate the techniques well enough to advance, because the curriculum was all basically self-defense. So that was part of it. Is that I wasn't as a person who was interested in self-defense, I didn't have to keep that fire burning myself, right? I was at a place where we were learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with an emphasis on self-defense. And there's a lot of people who just like to roll. That's fine. But I didn't have to go elsewhere to try to find the self-defense training that I really loved. And Professor Mike Yaklik is very passionate about self-defense as well. And as for why I've maintained that, it's for two things. Number one, something Master Silvio Berding said to me, or said to us, I should say. He didn't say it just to me, but he said it to sort of a group of the instructors while we were doing instructor training. And he said that you should always emphasize self-defense for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, especially for white belts. And the reason why is because most people who train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu will never get a blue belt. Just statistically, I've been very lucky. My retention has been very good. But just statistically, most people, they try jiu-jitsu, then they get busy or they get injured or they have kids. Like it happens, right? So most people who train in jiu-jitsu, like 90% of them won't get a blue belt. Out of those people who get a blue belt, 90% of them probably are going to make it to purple belt, right? So if somebody comes into your club and they train for a year and then they leave, what have you given them in the 1 year they've been training with you? Very right? True. If you only train people to go and get medals in tournaments under IBJJF rules, and that's all you teach, then you have somebody who has played a sport for a year, and they're going to have some positive correlation to self-defense. Like they're going to be able to handle themselves better than the average person, but not nearly as much as if it had been your focus, right? So after they leave after a year, they're not really taking with them that same sort of impact. You haven't given them life skills that will stay with them for the rest of their lives and maybe even save their life someday. So the impact that we want to make with that limited time we might have with a student, we're trying to maximize that impact. So if you teach self-defense and you emphasize self-defense, and you're not just teaching, how to control a human being, you're also talking about, the context of self-defense, your responsibilities for self-defense, right? A lot of people teaching self-defense, they don't know the laws about self-defense, which to me, that is
very true.
For me, that is an unforgivable level of negligence. If you are teaching self-defense and you do not know the laws for self-defense where you teach, that to me is unforgivable negligence.
Absolutely agree.
So, for Canada, for instance, we are not allowed to carry weapons in Canada. I don't. And the reason why, and when the way that you define a weapon is anything that does not have reasonable utility beyond being a weapon. So if I'm a contractor or a construction worker or something like that, I have a box cutter in my pocket, right? And I get attacked, and I remember I have the box cutter, right? Mm-hmm. I could use that box cutter as long as it's a reasonable, proportionate response to the level of threat that I faced. Mm-hmm. But if I've got a gnarly double-sided push dagger in my pocket, or if I have a taser, or even like a Kubaton or knuckles, or like any of these sort of self-defense items you see marketed on the internet all the time, including in Canada, that is carrying a weapon. You are carrying something on your person that does not have reasonable utility other than hurting a human being. That's a weapon. So you're going to get charged for that. And you can get 10 years for carrying a weapon, especially if it's a concealed weapon.
Whoa.
So,
Okay.
when I teach, like I've got a program that's going to be coming up pretty soon that focuses on everyday carry of a flashlight, because the flashlight will pass the reasonable utility test every time. So I've got this whole program that's a basic women's self-defense program that's all based around everyday carry of a flashlight. And it's not even really like striking with the flashlight or anything like that. You don't need one of those ones with like the beveled edges and the blades and stuff like that. It's just a flashlight. It's just a steel or aluminum flashlight where you can shine it towards the opponent and they can't look directly at you. So you don't have to know as much jiu-jitsu to defend yourself. So because I understand the self-defense laws, like I'm never going to tell somebody, oh yeah, buy a Kubaton, buy a taser, buy a stun, buy those like monkey knuckles that looks like a kitty, but it's actually a pair of knuckles and punch somebody with. Like, first of all, forget using that stuff in a fight unless you're actually trained. But anyways, that's a whole other thing. But if you don't train, but if you train with that mentality and you understand the law and you are educating people, not just in jiu-jitsu, not just how to control a human being and win a tournament, but how to fight when there's no mats, you're on concrete, how to fight when they're trying to punch you, not trying to pass your guard, how to fight when they're trying to push you up against a wall, because walls are ubiquitous in self-defense. Most self-defense situations happen either inside or just outside of a building. Very few fights happen in a field. Right, so you have so there's almost always walls around. So wall techniques essential for self-defense, right? Being able to use the wall and not have the wall used against you. If I teach that and they train with me for a year, they might leave, but they are safer for the rest of their lives because of the year they spent with me. It's not just another sport they were trying, like hockey or tennis or whatever, right? So that to me was very impactful when Master Bering talked about that, when he said, if you only have a student for a year, what would you rather they leave with, right? A year of sport training, maybe they got a couple medals, maybe they had some fun rolling, or do you want to leave them with life skills that they can use for the rest of their lives?
Absolutely.
Right? So that to me was a big thing. Also, I've always been very interested. I never ended up following the military path. I actually went to college for massage therapy of all things. But I've always been interested in the sort of tactical application for jiu-jitsu, for self-defense, for different kinds of goals and desirable outcomes. Because this is a thing that I feel like is missing from a lot of martial arts training, especially self-defense, which is what is the desirable outcome that you are training? Because if you look up self-defense on YouTube, what scenario are they training you for? Right? It's always a guy with a ski mask trying to come through your window and end your whole bloodline. Right? That does not reflect the reality of 99% of real self-defense situations you're going to come across. Right? So I'm interested in coming up with ways to apply jiu-jitsu to a police officer who does not have the same responsibility, does not have the same desirable outcome for the fight as civilian self-defense, right? Civilian self-defense martial arts are for creating an opportunity to get away, creating an opportunity to get help, creating an opportunity to buy time until help comes. That's not what a police officer does. You train a police officer that way, it's not applicable because they're supposed to run towards the danger. They're not trying to create an opportunity to get away. They're trying to subdue and arrest. Totally different application, right? Same martial arts, but totally different application, right? If you are teaching special forces operators, right? They're not trying to create an opportunity to run away. They're not trying to subdue and arrest. They might be doing capture kill, right? So totally different application, totally different mentality, totally different ways of using the same techniques. So that's always interested me, right? Teachers, I've got material that I teach for education workers, right? How do you break up a fight safely? Right, that reflects the reality of most self-defense situations. So my recognition of how much of that is missing in self-defense, right? Yeah, because like I say, 99% of self-defense instructors, they want to prepare you for Mortal Kombat, right? That's not the reality for most self-defense situations. What I'm interested in is, okay, how can I take this teacher's assistant who is supposed to be who's around when two 16, 17-year-old athletic kids in a high school start wailing on each other, right? She's the adult. She's the professional. She's going to feel an obligation to get involved in that. How do you do that? How do you do that in a way that's safe for you? How do you do that in a way that minimizes harm to the child that you're trying to subdue? How do you make yourself safe? How do you make them safe? Right? If you have somebody who trains in a martial arts where that in that setting with those techniques with that instructor, all they're talking about is how to treat somebody like an enemy combatant. That's not good self-defense training for most people, right? Because you're not, they're not trying to treat those kids as enemy combatants. They don't want to hurt the kid they're controlling either, right? That kid might not be evil, right? Maybe that kid is distressed, like they have mental health issues. They are lashing out, not because they're angry at anybody. They don't know what to do with the emotions inside, right? You're gonna Ippon Sainage throw that kid on his head? No, he's the victim, right? So that's always that's part of what motivates and inspires me, because I recognize that there is a serious lack of this material out there, and I have the skills to fill that need. I think that's a mentality shift. I call it thinking outside the fight. I think a lot of self-defense instructors need to think outside the fight, right? Why are you teaching a police officer to treat the perpetrator as an enemy combatant, right? If they're shooting at you, sure. They're coming at you with a machete, sure. You're in a fight for your life. You got to treat it like a fight for your life. But if somebody's just in mental distress and you're there, they're not an enemy combatant. They are a victim. They are a subject, right? You have to subdue and arrest them. You have to keep yourself safe, but you're not trying to hurt them any more than you have to. So, when I see police training combatives videos where they're like, yeah, this is a war, you're an army, like, why are you, like, it says serve and protect on the side of the cars. Like, that, right? You're not an occupying army in your neighborhood. You're supposed to be there to help people, right? You're supposed to be the person that people run to, not run away from, right? So that whole mentality shift needs to happen. So that it motivates and inspires me to keep on doing what I can to get this information out there to fill that need, because it's very rare. So that's why I've kept on emphasizing self-defense more than anything. I've got students who compete, but I'm not a competition school, and that's one of the biggest differences I've seen, because we are now at the point where we are several black belt generations removed from when the sport exploded in popularity around like 2012, 2013, right?
Yeah.
So now you've got clubs who say they're teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they still say on their website that they're teaching self-defense, because that's part of the marketing for martial arts. It's sort of expected that self-defense is one of the benefits. But the reality is, what they're teaching, it's going to prepare you for self-defense better than training in another style where you're at least not drilling or rolling, right? If you got somebody who does nothing but sport and they drill and roll for sport, they're going to be way better off in a self-defense situation just for that, even if they're not training specifically in self-defense. And they're way better off people who are training for self-defense, but not drilling or rolling. But to me, unless you are actually addressing the different factors of self-defense, and unless you're talking about somebody's responsibility for self-defense, right? If you're teaching a 7-year-old self-defense, a big part of that self-defense training should be their responsibility for self-defense, right? If a kid if a kid is yelling at you, that's you have the right to protect your personal space. You have the right to say, I don't like what you're doing, please stop. If they push you, you have the right to defend your personal space. But if just because the kid shoves you doesn't mean you can throw them on the concrete. That's a disproportionate response. That's not your responsibility, right? So that needs to happen. So if they're not doing that, if they're just a competition school, no problem. But I feel like we're getting to the point now where there are clubs who are calling what they do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, saying on the website that they teach self-defense, but they never teach self-defense. They're preparing students okay for self-defense, but it's in spite of the fact that they're not actually teaching self-defense, right? So, and even with the sport, the way that the sport is evolving, you're starting to see a lot more money coming into the sport, right? People can actually make money winning jiu-jitsu tournaments, which that never happened in 2002. I'll tell you that much. were there were a lot of broke world champions
Yeah.
in
You
2000.
want a pickle?
Yeah, exactly. Right? There are a lot of there's a lot of broke world champions in 2002, but now today there's a lot of money in it, right? There's a lot of people
Yeah.
who they're interested in their child being good at the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Still weird to me, but that's happening. So there's a lot of money in it now. So you get so you have as soon as you get money in a sport, the sport changes fundamentally. Right.
Absolutely.
So what you start to see in the sport is a lot more hyper specific, specialized strategies for winning in that rule set. And pulling guard is a great example of that, right? Because if you want to win in IBJJF rules, the most efficient way to do it is to pull guard and sweep. And it's
Yeah.
really not even close. If you add up the points at major competitions that are scored, most of the points, and it's not even close. It's like it's a majority of the points in any given high level tournament that are scored using sweeps. So you score points by pulling guard, right? Because if you got to fight several times that day, right, fighting for takedowns takes more energy out of you than pulling guard by far, right?
Sure.
So fighting for takedowns, it's a higher risk of injury. It's a higher risk of tiring yourself out, so you're not 100% for your next fight. If you have an effective guard and you're good at pulling into a technique, you're not just pulling and then waiting for them to start passing, right? If you're pulling guard effectively and then right into a sweep, right into an attack, right into a submission, that is the most efficient way to win under IBJJF rules. But what that takes away, if you are in a club where they don't really emphasize throws, they don't really emphasize takedowns, they emphasize pulling guard for good reason for a sport, right? Because it's the most efficient way to win, right? If I just want you to win tournaments and my goal is to make you good at winning tournaments, I'm going to teach you how to pull guard. I'm going to teach you how to pull guard and sweep, pull guard and armbar, pull guard and triangle. And that's what we're going to focus on. And that's fine if all you want to do is win medals. But what it's taking away is what I was talking about before. If I pull guard on you, I'm not training to take you down. I'm not training, and you're not training not to be taken down. So there's this whole element of being able to control the street fight, whether we go to the ground, whether we don't go to the ground, whether I put you on the ground and go down with you. None of that is going to be a big part of our training anymore if both of us are being trained to pull guard. So I don't have a problem with pulling guard. A lot of people get really kind of gatekeepy about guard pulling. They say like, oh, it should be penalized, or it should be taken out of the sport, or you shouldn't be able to do it in certain rule sets. I don't agree with that because I think one of the best things about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the accessibility. If you're banged up, if you got a bad back, if you're just getting older, you got arthritis, whatever it is, you want to compete in judo, forget it. Yeah. It's there's it's really hard.
It's too dynamic.
Yeah, it's there's not really a way to play the game of judo in a way that's easier on the body for somebody who is injured or older or anything else. So in jiu-jitsu, because you can pull guard and because you can play the game in a way that avoids the parts of the fight that are hardest on the body, our sport is far more accessible, right? You can have somebody who has a really nasty back injury and they can't fight for takedowns at all, but they can pull guard and they can compete. They can be effective,
Agreed.
right? So I don't agree with penalizing pulling guard. I don't agree with taking it out of the sport. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. And I really like how accessible it makes the sport. But again, I think you should have to call it what it is. If you're not training throws, if you're not training takedowns, you're not teaching self-defense. So if you want to just teach people how to pull guard and sweep, I get it. That is the most efficient way to go to tournaments and win medals. But if you're going to put on your website that you teach self-defense and your students can't do throws or takedowns and they don't have good throw or takedown defense because they never need to, they pull guard, you're not teaching self-defense. So,
absolutely.
I don't have a problem with you not teaching self-defense, but don't say one thing and do another. So I think that because there's money in the sport now, because there's specialization now, that's what's being sort of left behind. There's this disconnect now where people just assume that because you're training in a martial art, you're learning self-defense. You're not. So if you just want to be the best competition school in your city and you want to advertise yourself as, hey, you want to win medals, you want to be a world champion, this is where you come. Great. Put that on your website.
Yeah.
Just don't call it self-defense training if it's not. If you're treating it as a sport, just call yourself the best sport coach around for jiu-jitsu, right? So I think that's where the sport has started to really turn the corner. We're not treating the sport of jiu-jitsu as a way to train the macro skills of self-defense against 100% resistance. It's become its own thing.
I agree. It's quite interesting because you really have a warrior's outlook onto jiu-jitsu. It's fascinating. And I was going to ask who your influences are, but from what you're saying, I can already see it'll be someone like Silvio Bering and those type of guys. By the way, I have a very, very close friend who got his corral belt from Silvio. Okay.
Oh, wow.
He's a 10-minute drive from here. We see one of my best friends, older guy. And basically what you said, it doesn't mirror, but it's so right, man. Like what you're saying, especially when it comes to self-defense, it's not games in self-defense. And I think what you said exactly, if you're not teaching someone to throw or how to stop a throw, it's not self-defense.
No.
But the accessibility of the guard, which you're saying, that was something, because I understand, I've always said to pull guard and in straight into an attack or sweep shouldn't be punished. But now what you said is quite intelligent, because if someone's injured or they can't physically throw someone, that accessibility, that they can do something is very interesting.
Yeah.
Now here's another thing.
And for that person who has that issue of accessibility, that is going to be their self-defense training.
Okay,
right?
I get you. I agree.
Because guess what? If you have an issue that does not allow you to fight for takedowns, does not allow you to fight for throws, you are more likely than anybody in a street fight situation to end up on your back. So that's
Very
your
true.
self-defense training now. Right?
Very true. I mean, that's logic, right? That's pure logic there. Now, the interesting thing about your school and your interpretation of self-defense is the fact that you also teach kickboxing, Muay Thai mixed with the Kyokushinkai, which I think that's very interesting. Like, I want to hear a little bit about that. So what's when you're teaching your striking, do you find that there's different methods of teaching if a person is focused on pure kickboxing, Muay Thai, pure self-defense, or MMA? Like, what's your focus on that?
Well, I do teach self-defense as part of the kickboxing, but it's a very small part. And when someone is asking about coming and training with me, about to start their trial, I do kind of a needs assessment, like an intake, where I ask them, what are your goals? What do you hope to gain from martial arts? And if their main goal is self-defense, I always direct them to the jiu-jitsu program, because they're going to learn the striking they need to learn in the jiu-jitsu program to be effective for self-defense. But if their main goal is self-defense, kickboxing is definitely going to be better than nothing, way better than nothing. It is going to build comfort and confidence in a striking situation, which is helpful. But when it comes to self-defense, if you're thinking of something like boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, something like that for self-defense, it's something that I think a lot of people, they're concerned for the right reasons, but their response to that concern is wrong. They'll take something, they'll say like, oh, boxing's better for self-defense because you're not on the ground. Oh, kickboxing's better for self-defense because you're not on the ground. But not wanting to be on the ground in a street fight is more reason to train on the ground, not less. It's saying, oh, yeah. I don't train to fight on the ground because I don't want to be on the ground in a street fight. That's like taking the airbags and the seatbelts out of your car because you don't want to have a car crash. Right? It's not always up to you whether you get on the ground or not. And if you don't train on the ground, it's more likely not to be up to you whether you get on the ground or not.
I
So
agree.
for kickboxing, if you are not training kickboxing with a pretty heavy clinch component, that's the first thing. I teach a ton of clinch, and that's something that definitely applies to the self-defense. Because if you are in a fight, there's different ranges that you fight at, right? There's outside range. I can't hit you, you can't hit me. There is clinch range, where we have the ability to grab onto each other and limit how we can strike each other. And then there's active combat range. Active combat range is right in the middle, where I can hit you, you can hit me. And that is the last place that you want to be in a street fight. You never want to be just standing in front of the person, trading strikes back and forth, right? Even I don't want to do that. I think I could win a fist fight against 99.9% of people on earth. I'm still not going to give them the chance. I'm still not going to give them the chance for a lucky strike. So I want to be, so the strikes that I teach for self-defense are all about controlling that range. Either I am keeping you too far away to hit me, or I'm standing too close for you to hit me, where I can wrap and control you. So if you are training in boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, whatever, especially if you compete in those sports, you are spending a lot of time at active combat range, just trading strikes back and forth. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, the rules of the sport basically govern you to be at active combat range. They incentivize you to be at active combat range. If you are training in the sport of boxing is done at active combat range, because they're not allowed to clinch. If they go too far away from each other, they're called back to the center, right? They're penalized for stalling and avoiding the fight, right? They can't grab onto each other. They can't fight on the ground. So the whole sport is played at active combat range, and that's the last place you want to be. So if you are training in a striking martial art where you're trading strikes back and forth at active combat range, terrible for self-defense. You never want to be in that situation. Right? You never want to give them the chance. You always want to be too far away or too close. So I have self-defense techniques that I teach for kickboxing, but it's not like, you're going to do, 80% kickboxing, and then we're going to just throw 20% jiu-jitsu in there so that you learn some self-defense. I don't think that works. So instead, I use what I call bunkai. Bunkai is a Japanese word that means application, and it's supposed to be the step after kata. So when you train a kata in Japanese martial arts, Okinawan martial arts, where you're just kind of in a line and you're just kind of acting out the move, right? That's the first step. And the reason why that evolved as a training method for karate and different martial arts like that is because that's the easiest way to have 3 guys at the front of the room teaching 500 guys, right? They could teach a kata to 500 people, no problem, right? But after you learn the kata, is supposed to come bunkai. Bunkai is the combative application for the kata. So it's like, okay, this fundamental movement pattern that you've been learning, here's how it actually applies in a combat situation. So it's supposed to be the next step. Now, some places they teach you the kata, they never teach you the bunkai, right? So you're getting a black belt and swinging a bat, and they're saying it's a black belt in baseball. But but for me, for the kickboxing, there's a very small self-defense element, and it's not different. It's not like, oh, here's a self-defense thing that's totally different than what you are training 80% of the time. Doesn't make sense. You can't just drag and drop BJJ into a kickboxing program. So instead, it's like, okay, here's a simple clinch technique that normally you would use in a sport environment. Here's how it applies in a self-defense situation, right? So we're changing very small things like, okay, what if the person wasn't coming at you with nice tight punches and throwing combos and closing the door with kicks? They're swinging a haymaker at you, right? Not something you see in kickboxing a whole lot, but if somebody swings a haymaker at you, here's how you can apply the exact same techniques you always train in a way that's more applicable to a street fight. Okay, here's the same clinch techniques that you always do, but now we're against a wall, right? So there's a very small element of kickboxing where I'm teaching the application of their techniques in a self-defense application. Mm-hmm. But if somebody wants self-defense, I try to explain to them that we'll be better off for self-defense taking kickboxing than not taking kickboxing. But okay. While it'll build that comfort and that confidence, if you're looking for self-defense, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the way to go. So it does change things when you are trying to think about, okay, how does kickboxing work for self-defense? Okay, well, now we're talking about never trading strikes at active combat range. We're talking about keeping them away with front kicks, thrusting kicks, and if they get close enough to punch, we're basically closing the distance right away. It's not looking a whole lot like kickboxing anymore.
No. What's interesting is also the way you explained your ranges. You started at like outside range, clinch, and then you had active. And before, like in the 90s, the big thing was the Jeet Kune Do, which was the the kicking, the punching, trapping, and ground and weapons. And I actually think I never heard it how you said, but I think that's actually much better for self defense. Is the fact you nailed it. I think you don't want to be in that active range. That's the last place you want to be. Either you're not getting hit or you're in the clinch.
Yeah, it's the only place where somebody's gonna have a chance against me, right? It's the only place there's lucky punches, right? If somebody big, strong, big haymaker comes out of nowhere, right, and I'm standing where it can hit me, I can still get knocked out by that, right? I've got a lot of training. I'm big. I'm strong. I'm fast. I could I've got all these things working for me, but I've still got the same mushy brain in here that everyone else has, right?
Yeah.
So if I take a hit, right, I'm running a risk. So I'm never ever, doesn't matter how confident I am, I'm never going to stand in the one place where somebody with no training could win a fight against me. They're not they're not going to get lucky in the clinch with me.
It's very
Right?
intelligent. Listen, it's the right way of thinking. There's no ego in that. And you're just basically minimizing where you can get hurt. You're saying, okay, there's a possibility here. Let's get rid of it.
Yeah.
What also people don't understand is I met this man, and he's a very strong guy. Very strong guy.
Yeah, I don't
And
think
just
so.
well, but I'm talking about that. You really know your stuff in strength and conditioning. Like, honestly, you have the Agatsu. I was reading about that. Also, you're really into the strongman thing, but you really do it from I would say from a scientific point of view, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I
Tell me
definitely,
about that.
a lot of strength coaches and strongman competitors would say that I intellectualize it a bit too much, right? A lot of it is, big man lift heavy rock. And that's, to me, like, that's fun too, right? You can definitely get your nose caught in the books too much. That could definitely go
Yeah.
that way. I work for the Agatsu Fitness Organization. I've been with them since I was about 18. So I teach kettlebell instructor certifications. Then I teach a course that's called the Strength and Speed Specialist Certification course. And I travel around mostly in Canada to do that. I have a relationship with Good Life Fitness, so I teach the training staff of Good Life Fitness in athletic development. So it's basically taking the sort of elite powerlifting, strongman, track and field, court sports kind of methodology that people usually think of as, oh, just the top 1% of athletes are doing that. And I'm explaining to personal trainers how that material can apply to their general population's clients that are walking in the door of a Good Life Fitness. Just people want to be happier, healthier, stronger, make their lives easier, maybe change their body composition if that's their goal, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I've also had the amazing opportunity to teach elsewhere. I've taught in Hong Kong and Singapore and places like that, where I've worked with a chain called Pure Fitness, which is kind of like Good Life but for Asia. I've done a lot of work for them. So it's been a pretty I've been very fortunate to have these opportunities to teach and also to learn from teaching. It's always a big deal for me to be able to go to different places and hear different people ask different questions in the course, and it kind of steers the course one way or another. And the course is always evolving, so I'm always sort of trying to shape it in a way where I can deliver the maximum amount of information without just sort of info dumping, as my wife likes to call it, where I start kind of talking at you instead of with you. Right, I'm always working on that. So it's been kind of interesting, because you don't typically think of somebody like me doing jiu-jitsu. There's not a lot of people who do high level powerlifting, strongman, bodybuilding. Olympic
You're right.
lifting, whatever it is, and also dedicate as much time as I have to jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
Or other martial arts.
Especially strongman. Like strongman's very rare to see the jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. And it's funny to me because I think that sometimes in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, we become sort of obsessed with the idea of the efficiency and the timing and the leverage, and we sort of like if somebody is unable to make a technique work, we're always looking for that. Oh, how do we deliver this technique in a slightly? We just kind of polish up these edges a little bit. Maybe we try to get the hip out at a 16-degree angle instead of a 15-degree angle, and then they can do it. If you go back further to the training of Mitsuo Maeda, right, his generation of the 1905 judoka, a lot of their training was about efficiency as well, but they also would approach roadblocks in ways where, sometimes they kept it simple. They were like, okay, this technique isn't working because you're not strong enough. Well, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time figuring out how we can shave those little bits off the timing and the leverage and the momentum. It's like, get stronger.
No, absolutely.
So it's and of course you see that at the top level, right? Like people talk about Gordon Ryan and how strong he is, and it's not good for his jiu-jitsu is really not that great. He's just super strong. First of all, he's beaten a lot of other people who are super strong too.
Absolutely.
Like you think you guys like Buchecha are weak? Forget it. But once you get to the top level, you start to see people who have everything. You start to see, Michael Schumacher probably wouldn't have won as many world championships if he had the slowest car, right? He was the best driver and he had the fastest car, right? That's Gordon Ryan.
Good analogy. Absolutely.
You have to have, you're trying to maximize the package that you're bringing to the fight. And that means maximizing the technique, the leverage, the efficiency. It also means maximizing the delivery system for that technique, which is your body. Right. So it's funny because I talk about self-defense and stuff like that. And I get a lot of people, Stephen Kesting, and I talked about this on his podcast not too long ago, where he's like, how do you teach self-defense when people are just kind of looking at you and saying, okay, well, of course that technique works for you, right? You're 6'3" and 310 pounds and you lift heavy rocks for fun. Right.
He lifts jumbo jets for a living.
Right. So, but for me, it's again, they're concerned for the right reasons, but their idea of how that applies to reality is completely backwards. For me, it's perfect that I'm like this because I can now be the best possible resource for my students who I'm teaching self-defense. My assistant instructor for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is an 18-year-old woman who is literally, not figuratively, half my size. So if I could teach her a self-defense technique that kind of works, even kind of works on somebody like me, I could be 100% confident that what I'm teaching her is going to work against the average person, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm in a, of course, there's techniques that I could use that maybe people who aren't like me could use, but I also can play the other side of that coin better than anybody. I could be that resource where it's like, if anybody can poke holes in this technique, I can. So it gives me the confidence to know that what I'm teaching is good because I could teach it to her and then she can demonstrate it. And the students could see her throw me. They could see her control me, legitimately control me, right? When I'm turning my jiu-jitsu brain off and just attacking as if it's still me, still my strength, still my size, still my weight, but without the technique, attacking like a normal street attacker would, she can handle it. And they see amazing. That. They see the person half my size being able to apply her purple belt level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to deal with everything but my brain. And that is, it's an amazing confidence booster for me and for my students.
As a teacher, for sure. Also, as a teacher, just shows that what you're teaching is actually going to make a difference in a fight or defense situation.
You always want to think that what you're teaching is legit, but it's
absolutely.
Yeah, but if you could really, when I go out of my way to poke holes in something, it's like, hey, if anybody's going to be able to bicep curl their way out of this arm bar, it's me. If I can't do it, then I'm confident that they're not going to run anybody who can.
I definitely agree with you. And talk about you being a resource. Here's an interesting question. I'm just reading because I have a lot of questions for you. What are now? It's two pronged. What do grapplers need as a bread and butter strength and conditioning program, and what are some of the most overrated strength and condition exercises for grapplers? This I want to hear from you.
Okay. So I'm going to answer both your questions at once, basically.
This is great.
The number one thing that any athletes, not just combat athletes, need to understand is why you are in the weight room instead of just doing more of your sport.
Valid.
Okay? That's the question you have to ask. Why am I in the weight room? Why am I on the track? Why am I in the pool? Why am I doing something other than jiu-jitsu? Right? And when you ask yourself that question, it becomes pretty straightforward, right? Because the biggest mistake that a lot of athletes make, and this is not just a jiu-jitsu thing, but it is especially a jiu-jitsu thing, is they are trying to bring jiu-jitsu into the weight room. They are going way too far to the sport-specific side of training. And sport-specific training is like the last 5% of what you should be thinking about doing in the weight room. Because if you are, and coaches fall into this trap too, like trainers fall into this trap too. If you're a personal trainer and you got a guy who comes to you and their goal they want to achieve is to be better at jiu-jitsu, a lot of trainers will feel pressure to try to bring the sport into the weight room. They're trying to be specific with everything. They're trying to we're doing this kind of movement because this is the kind of movement you do in jiu-jitsu. We're doing this kind of movement because this is the kind of thing you do in jiu-jitsu. Like they're trying to bring the sport into the weight room. Totally backwards. Totally backwards. Because the reason you're there is to get something that you can't get just from doing more jiu-jitsu. If all I'm going to do with you in the weight room is try to set it up so that you're just doing jiu-jitsu with weights, then you would probably benefit more from just doing another jiu-jitsu training session per week instead of doing strength conditioning, right? Rather than, trying to hook up a weight belt to yourself and hook it up to a cable machine and shoot doubles against the cable resistance, you would get way more from just drilling doubles on the mat. Way more. So when we're talking about strength and conditioning, we're talking about things that you are that you're doing in the weight room. And the reason we're doing these things in the weight room, not doing just more jiu-jitsu, is because these are things that will help us be better at jiu-jitsu that we can't get from just doing more jiu-jitsu.
Okay, got
That's why we're in the weight room. And the number one thing that you're going to get from training with weights that you can't get just from doing more jiu-jitsu is maximal strength. The ability to produce force at maximal levels, right? So when we think about maximal force, we're thinking about your 1 rep max, right? The type of thing that we're talking about is producing as much force as you possibly can, improving the body's ability to produce force. So if I take my deadlift from 600 to 700, I have improved my maximal strength. Okay. We're not talking about strength. We're not talking about strength endurance, right? The ability to repeat lower intensity efforts for longer. We're not talking about, cardio, where we're improving the efficiency of our heart and lungs to be able to produce, aerobic capacity for longer. We're not necessarily talking about explosiveness, where we're talking about moving very light or no loads at extreme speed, though that is applicable to maximal strength training. We're talking about maximal strength training, right? And this is very important for grapplers, because in strength and conditioning, we have this thing called the explosive strength deficit. And put very simply, it's a lens through which we can figure out what kind of training is going to be the best bang for the buck for the athlete. Will this athlete benefit in their sport from their squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press going up? Because not all sports really benefit all that much from that, right? Yeah. The explosive strength deficit is really about how much of your strength you can apply in your sport. And there's several factors to consider there. Number one is there exterior resistance in the sport, right? Boxing, not a whole lot of exterior resistance, right? You're not putting your fist on the person's face and then pushing it, right? You're moving yourself. You're moving your fists, right? So, is there exterior resistance in the sport? In grappling, of course there is. It's another person trying to grapple you right back, right? So, is there exterior resistance? Yes. Is there extended contact with that exterior resistance? Are you applying your strength for longer periods of time? And that's a factor because our bodies can't produce maximal power instantly. They're kind of like turbocharged engines where they just spool up, right? It takes about 0.4 of a second to apply maximum strength.
Because of the ATP?
It's because of how fast our assess, interpret, and that our assess and interpret mechanism of what needs to happen, and the communication with the motor neuron units that fire muscle tissue. So if you want to apply maximal strength, like fire everything you have at one effort, it takes at least 0.4 of a second before you're actually applying as much power as you can. And that doesn't sound like a long period of time, but a punch takes a lot less than 0.4 of a second. So like any activity that takes less than 0.4 of a second, you cannot apply with maximum power. It's impossible. You can't spool up. So are we in extended contact with the resistance where we can actually use all of our strength? In grappling, of course we are. We're in extended contact, right? You're applying force for a lot longer than 0.4 of a second when you're grappling, right? So these different considerations all start to add up, and we start to see that there's a very low explosive strength deficit. We're not leaving much of our strength on the table. The strength you have, you can use as a grappler. And it's not that we don't do maximal strength training for boxers, because they need it as well, because there's weight divisions in boxing, right? If I'm training a boxer who competes at 130 pounds, we're probably not going to do a whole lot of maximal strength training. Why?
That was going to be my question.
A lighter body, so it doesn't take as much force to move that lighter body at greater speed. But if you're a heavyweight, if you have a 240-pound body and you want to be able to move that body quickly, well, force is mass times acceleration. So this is where the myth comes from that lifting weights makes you slow. Because if you are, if you want to lift weights to make you a better martial artist, but you're not doing the right kind of training, you're not actually getting stronger. You're just doing like a bodybuilding program. You downloaded Dorian Yates' Blood and Guts off the internet, and you just did that, right? You're making yourself bigger, but you're not making yourself stronger. You're not able to apply more force. All of a sudden, you have a larger mass you're trying to move. You're trying to move it at the same speed you always move. There's a higher force cost to pay for moving that bigger body at the same speed. So if you can't pay the cost, if you can't produce that much force, then your acceleration is going to go down because your mass has gone up, right? So you can be big and fast as long as you're strong, right? So if you're big and slow, it's probably because you're weak, right? So so when we look at grappling as a sport, right, light divisions, heavy divisions, everyone benefits from maximal strength training, and the more general, the better, because we're not trying to bring the sport into the weight room. If we were doing that, just do more of the sport, right? And there's different benefits to cross training as well. Like if you're taking a break from jiu-jitsu 1 day a week because you're training twice a day, right? You're doing rowing or biking or something like that instead. It's nice to kind of give your body a bit of a break from the specific wear and tear of jiu-jitsu, right? That's why a lot of hockey players play lacrosse in the off season, right? Because it's applicable enough, but it's still giving their body a break from the specific wear and tear.
The eye hand coordination. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Right. So it's nice to cross train for that reason. But if we're talking about, positive correlation back to the sport, the more general, the better. So when I train a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athlete, right, and I'm not a good model for this because I am a person who cares how much weight I can lift as well. So I am not a good model for how I would train a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor who just wants to lift weights to be a better Jiu-Jitsu competitor, because I'm trying to get better at both. So off the bat, if anybody's on my Instagram and they see like how I train and what I'm doing,
and he trains hard, boys. He trains hard.
It's similar, but it's not the same. if I have somebody training in jiu-jitsu, they would not be doing the kind of volume I'm doing. They would not be they would not be lifting the kind of weights I'm lifting. They would not be doing the kind of movements I'm doing, because they wouldn't be able to recover enough to do that, and also do the kind of camp you need to do to get ready for the San Jose Open. Right? It's just not going to happen. So if I were to give you a starter pack of the exercises you should be doing as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor, I would say the box squat with a wide stance. So that means that you are taking the bar to the rack, sitting onto a box, partially relaxing on that box, like not letting your air out. So you got to pack air in when you're squatting. Sitting on the box is not a resting place. Like you sit on the box and then drive off the box, but you stop on the box for a second. So that now you're not kind of coiling up and then releasing like you would be for a free squat. You're actually sitting on the box, partially relaxing and then exploding off the box. So you're overcoming a static, semi-relaxed position by being explosive, right? So that's a much more applicable to athletic activities, and it's also easier to recover from. You recover much more quickly from box squatting than you do from free squatting. So the box squat to like a parallel box where the crease of your hip is parallel with the tip of your knee. That's a good spot. Like for most people, that's going to be like an 18-inch box, right? Very common size for boxes. Just find an 18-inch box. Whatever your height, it's probably going to be at least close. If you're below parallel, put a couple plates on it, prop it up a little bit. You'll get shit on the internet for it, but what's more important, making people on the internet happy or your performance? Right?
Absolutely,
Easy.
I agree.
So box squat either right at or just above parallel, absolutely essential. Second one is a power row from the floor. So you have so it's like a barbell row, but you're not picking up the barbell and then rowing it for reps. You're letting the bar rest on the floor. You're getting tight and then explosively rowing the bar from the floor to your body and then putting it back on the floor. Resting, stopping, rowing off the floor again. So if you look on YouTube and you search up Pendlay row, like Pendlay, that's kind of what it is. But for a Pendlay row, they usually try to keep their back completely horizontal. We don't have to do that. Well, you can have your back up a little bit more, like almost like you're going to deadlift, but then row the bar instead. Explosive rows, right? I've got lots of videos on my Instagram of me doing that. So if you're not sure, then I can find it on the Instagram, or I can put.
And we'll put his Instagram in the description definitely at the end.
So box squat, power row from the floor, and bench press. And if you don't have somebody available to teach you how to bench press properly, floor press instead, where you are lying on the floor, take the bar out, lower it under control until your elbows are resting on the floor, pause, and then power it back up. So bench press, if you've got somebody around that can actually teach you how to bench press, like a powerlifting coach, you want
like a proper,
somebody who knows how to teach a powerlifting bench press, because bench pressing, very technical. It's probably the most technical lift that I teach.
I've gotten injured so many times benching.
Yeah, it's more technical than squatting. It's more technical than deadlifting. I would argue that out of the three main sort of power lifts that people do, bench is the most technically difficult. And the reason it's the most technically difficult is because you have to learn how to leg drive. You have to learn how to utilize your lower body in the bench press. So what the bench press gives you is the ability to apply full body connectivity in an upper body exercise. This is why shot put throwers do tons of bench pressing, right? Because it's a really good movement for teaching you to be able to use your whole body in an effort where you're only moving it with your own.
Very
so
interesting.
if you have access to a powerlifting coach who can teach you how to bench for real, it's not a chest exercise. Bench pressing with a barbell is actually a terrible chest exercise. I know it's the #1 international chest day exercise. Terrible chest exercise. Incline bench is way better for that. So if you have a good coach who could teach you how to use your legs and connect your whole body in the bench press, that would be the third one, right? A lot of people like to shit on bench press and say, oh, they post a picture of somebody in a rear naked choke, and it's like, oh, how much does your bench press matter now? Like they make all sorts of jokes about people, having a big bench press instead of being good at jiu-jitsu. I'm here to tell you, okay, Having a big bench press in jiu-jitsu is like having a black belt. The only people who say it doesn't matter don't have one. Okay?
Okay.
You will
That's a t-shirt right there.
Yeah, you will never you will never meet somebody who has a 400-pound bench press and says it doesn't help them when they do jiu-jitsu. Right? So it's so those are my big three: is box squat, power row from the floor, and bench press.
And what are
Right?
the biggest ones that are a waste of time?
Anything where you're trying to do a jiu-jitsu movement in the gym.
I agree. A
Because
lot of injuries that way.
yeah, like it's I mean, you could like I say, you could see the applicability of certain things. Like if I'm doing like a hand-to-hand landmine snatch or something like that, like you could see, oh yeah, I could see how it's mechanically similar to throwing a punch or something like that, right? When I'm doing a power row or a bench press, like you could see when I bench press, like, oh, okay, I could kind of see like the bridge, the hip escape, like you can kind of see it in there. But I'm not just putting a barbell on my lap and trying to bridge and strip against a barbell. I'm not trying to, hook myself up to bands and shoot doubles and stuff like that. It's again, if you're doing that in the gym, then personally, I don't think that is ever likely to be better than just putting in more mat time, because you're not giving your body a break from the specific wear and tear of jiu-jitsu. So it doesn't really qualify as cross training for recovery purposes, right? And and by trying to figure out ways to hook it up to resistance machines that are not made to do these kinds of three-dimensional movements, you're not getting the applicability either, right? So if I'm trying to shoot doubles attached to a cable machine instead of just shooting doubles with a partner, I'm just doing shittier doubling training. That's all I'm doing, right?
Just to say, I actually agree with you. In the Caucasus and also the stands, they use a lot of the resistance bands, but people don't understand that's not at all their primary workout. It's just to get some reps in, and it's more for cardio and stuff like this. It's not like, and anytime they could shoot on someone and lift them up at the end, they're going to. And I agree with you.
That's like I say, sports specificity has its place. There's sport specific exercises I will have someone doing, but the time for that is when they already have a great foundation of basic general strength. Okay, so push, pull, twist, lift, carry, drag, like basic exercises, general exercises. Focus on that. Doing, for strength, you do sets of 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps at around 75 to 80% intensity. So 75 to 80% of your 1 rep max is about where you should be. Don't worry about maxing out, because if your goal is to lift more weight, be honest with yourself and say your goal is to lift more weight. If your goal is to be a good jiu-jitsu competitor, then it doesn't matter if you're the best deadlifter in jiu-jitsu history. It matters if you're good at jiu-jitsu. So deadlifting for jiu-jitsu is different than deadlifting to be better at deadlifting. It is. So there are clients that I'll use sport-specific movements with, where I'm actually bringing more of their sport into the gym, but it's very rare, and we're talking about the last 5%. So you have to we call it being careful not to major in the minors, right? You don't want to major in the minors. You don't want to focus the limited time that you have on things that are going to give you the last 5% while you're neglecting the things that are going to give you the first 95%, right? So basic strength training will get you way further in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than trying to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on the mats and then just try to do more Jiu-Jitsu in the weight room, right? So that's what I would suggest. Like 90% of people do not need Jiu-Jitsu specific weightlifting. They need general weightlifting. Like train jumps to be generally more explosive, train throws to be generally more explosive, like throws of the medicine ball, stuff like that. Basic barbell strength training. Like I say, box squat, row, bench press, overhead pressing is great because it's going to help you with your mobility. Bodyweight exercises like shins and like chin ups and dips, like the most general strength
Bread and
training
butter.
program you can find. That's what's going to work because that is going to build your raw material. And then the raw material is going to be sculpted and made sport specific by just doing your sport. Okay.
Gotcha.
I've taught, but like I've trained people from all kinds of athletic backgrounds, particularly volleyball. It's weird. I've never played volleyball, never coached volleyball. I just happen to have trained a lot of volleyball players over the years. I don't know anything about volleyball. It would be so irresponsible of me to try to say, okay, well, you do something sort of like this in volleyball, so we're going to attach you to a cable and have you doing that. Okay, you do something kind of like this when volleyball, so we'll just like get you a 150-pound slam ball and have you kind of do this with it. It doesn't make any sense because I don't understand the sort of idiosyncrasies of every single sport well enough to be trying to bring that sport into the weight room. It doesn't make any sense. What I can do as a strength and conditioning instructor is improve your raw material. If I make you generally stronger, generally more mobile, generally more explosive, generally better conditioned, I improve your raw material as much as I can, make you the best overall athlete that I can. Then I give you back to your volleyball coach, and they take that raw material, they sculpt it into a better volleyball player. So that's the approach you want to have with yourself as the jiu-jitsu competitor, right? You do general strength training, that's your raw material. Then you take that raw material, sculpt it into a better jiu-jitsu player by doing jiu-jitsu, right? But yeah, that's my advice for everybody is keep it simple. Keep it really, really simple.
KISS principle, yeah.
And you will get so much better results from that than any crazy, like if you watch The Ultimate Fighter, right? They're showing you the flashy stuff because they know that's what's going to keep you watching. That's gonna be inspiring and motivating and engaging. But what they don't show is the first 95% of that person's training, which is just super basic stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Now, to go to another thing, because I think it's so fascinating. I know you don't have a lot of time. Yeah. Strongman.
I have like negative 15 minutes.
Do you mind if I ask one or two more questions? Is that fine with you?
I got one more question, and then I can.
Okay.
I'll call the dentist on the way and say I got held up in the snow. Don't believe me.
Okay. Now, guys, Tyson's a really, really serious strongman. Okay, and my question is, any benefit of strongman training for grapplers? That's something that no one talks about, and I've always wondered.
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. But within strongman, you have a similar sort of idea to what I was talking about before, because there's basically a spectrum. There is raw strength, right? Your raw material. Mm-hmm. So that's raw strength over here. Just how much force you can produce, period. Basic strength. So there's your strength, and then there is strength application. And in the sport of strongman, the events are going to be somewhere between those two. They're either going to be a very straightforward, a sort of simple setup where it's like, okay, we're going to deadlift, and it's going to be an apparatus where you don't have to stabilize it. It's just on a hinge, and there's a car on the back of it, and you deadlift it up and down, right? There's no stabilizing. There's no like balance element. There's nothing. It's just testing your pure raw strength, how much power you can produce. It's basically like a machine deadlift, right? So that's on one side of the spectrum, right? Then on the other side of the spectrum, they'll have something where it's like, I had a comp last year where the overhead event in the comp, there's always an overhead event of some kind. It's just different every time. Was a natural stone press. So it was a 200-pound stone that we had to lift overhead as many times as we could, right? 200 pounds on a barbell, not a problem, right? If it was 200 pounds on a barbell, I would have gotten lots of reps, no problem.
Yeah.
But when it's just like a 200-pound hunk of river rock they found and just brought in, right? You have to try to kind of clean it and get it up, and you try to find grips on it where when you press it, it's not just going to go off to one side like this. So that is way on the other side, strength application. Yeah. So when we're training for strongman, we have to be sort of in the middle and a little bit this way. in the middle, and a little bit this way. Because if you train too much strength application, you get really good at like stabilizing and balancing and stuff like that. But then if you don't have the raw strength, you can't progress any further than that. I'll give you an example. Sandbag. Lifting and carrying sandbags, or lifting and loading sandbags, is a pretty common event in strongman. Now, if I have a 300-pound sandbag, and I just train my legs and my back by lifting that 300-pound sandbag, great training for sandbags, right? Great training for strength application to be able to apply the strength I have to that bulky, uneven load, but it's not good training for my back and my legs, because there's too much of a skill element to applying the strength I have to that sandbag, right? So if I'm lifting a sandbag, right, that's great training for lifting a sandbag. It's great training for applying the back and leg strength that I already have to a weird load like a sandbag, weird angles and all that kind of stuff. But if I want to keep progressing, I can't only train by lifting sandbags, because my back and legs basic strength is going to suffer too much. I can't train my basic strength for my legs and my back by just lifting sandbags, because there's always that bottleneck of the strength application. So if you want to keep progressing, you got to do that strength application stuff in order to have good skills for lifting weird loads and at weird angles. And that's what we call the kind of training for real life stuff, functional training, right? But you can go way too far with that, right? In order to keep progressing and lifting heavier and heavier sandbags, I need to train how to lift sandbags by lifting sandbags, but I also need to work on my basic leg and back strength by just plain squatting and deadlifting, right? I have to, I have to keep on progressing my basic strength using loads that are not awkward, not hard to balance, so the basic strength has to keep on progressing with the very simple exercises. And then we train strength application by giving ourselves different challenges of how to apply that strength. So a lot of people make this mistake. They go all the way to this side of the spectrum, and they're like, oh, why would you lift 90-pound dumbbells on a bench when you could just put your back on a wiggly Bosu ball and have 40-pounders, and it's just as hard. It's hard, but it's not more intense, right? You're not actually it's that the carryover is only going to go one way, right? It might feel as difficult as lifting heavier dumbbells on a bench, but it's not because it's harder. It's not more intense in the scientific sense. It is harder because you're introducing a skill element to lifting those dumbbells, bouncing on the Bosu ball that wasn't there before on the bench. But I'll tell you something. You get one person who only ever lifts 90-pound dumbbells on a bench, and you get one person who only ever lifts 40-pound dumbbells on a Bosu ball. Take the person who only ever lifts 90-pound dumbbells on a bench, give him the 40s, put him on a Bosu ball, he'll figure it out. It'll take him a couple minutes to get the skill element down of lifting those dumbbells. But you take the person who only ever lifts 40-pound dumbbells on a Bosu ball, give them the 90s, and then put them on a stable bench. They can't do it because the basic strength of the muscles that are responsible for lifting those dumbbells cannot progress beyond lifting 40-pound dumbbells if you only ever lift 40-pound dumbbells. It doesn't matter what skill element you add around lifting those dumbbells. Your basic strength is not improving because you've gone too far to the other side of the spectrum, where now you're training your strength application, but you're not able to improve your basic strength because you've made things too weird, too imbalanced, right? So you have to train both. But if I'm on the spectrum here of basic strength to strength application, my training for strongman is almost always going to be just off center towards basic strength.
Okay, got you.
So most of my training is basic strength training. And then I would say it's probably 60-40 most of the time, where I'm training basic strength 60% of the time. And then 40% of the time, I'm making things a little bit weirder, a little bit more sort of functional, a little bit more real world, and making things a little bit more difficult, adding those skill elements. And then when I get closer to a competition, it's more like 70-30, 80-20, because when I'm going into the competition, I know what the events are going to be.
And you want to get the skill.
So, if I'm if I'm 4 or 6 weeks out from a competition, that's not enough time to improve my basic strength a whole lot. So at that point, it's going to start to swing the other way, where I'm doing a lot more skill development, trying to practice the events in the competition as much as I can. So, but then after that competition, I don't know when the next competition is, or I don't know what the events are going to be. I go back to mainly focusing on basic strength. So, so the mistake a lot of people make in training for strongman is the same mistake people make training for jiu-jitsu, right? It's like, oh, well, strongman, the sport, is lifting logs and carrying rocks and lifting sandbags and, all this kind of weird, sort of real life stuff, functional stuff, people call it. But if you only ever train by doing that, you're bottlenecking your basic strength development. Right. So you're always adding these skill elements. So you're not actually allowing your back, your legs, your shoulders, your triceps to just get stronger. So you need to keep on improving your basic strength. And that's going to be most of your focus until you're going into a competition. And for jiu-jitsu, it's the same thing, right? You're not, like, as you get closer to a tournament, your weightlifting is going to take a back seat. Right, it just is, right? You start to ramp the intensity, start to train more often, start to train more intensely, right? You might drop the weightlifting altogether, or you might switch to like speed work, where you're not benching heavy 80%. You're going out to like 40% and just moving as fast as you can, being explosive for like 8 to 10 sets of like 1 to 3, right? So you're just trying to train that force output from the other side, decrease the mass, increase the acceleration, right? You can do that to maintain your gains in season. So, same sort of the same sort of issue people run into. They get too far to the skill development application side of things, and they forget about just getting stronger. If you forget about just getting stronger, and everything is weird, everything's about application, everything's about skill development, then you're gonna plateau, and you're just gonna stay there until you learn that lesson of just going back to basics and just focusing on getting stronger.
Very smart. Tyson, how can people find you? What do you got going on? Let the world know.
Well, on Instagram, you can find me at Frozen North Fitness. So it's Frozen_North_Fitness. If you are looking for me for my martial arts content, I do have an Instagram for the martial arts content. It's called Ironside Martial Arts Canada. But your best bet, if you are looking for my martial arts content, is my YouTube. I'm trying to actually get my YouTube going now. For years, I neglected it, and I don't know why, because it's the only social media platform that actually makes you money. So I've just started taking YouTube a lot more seriously. I'm going to be doing that a lot more, and it's Taijutsu. So it's TY_Jutsu, JUTSU. So
we'll put those in the description for sure.
So Taijutsu on YouTube for my martial arts content. Go on my strength and conditioning content. If you want to know how you can come and do one of my courses at Agatsu, Frozen North Fitness on Instagram is the best place for that. That's where I'm going to get all the info when I'm going to announce upcoming courses and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Tyson, you are truly this. Usually I end up talking a lot more, but you're just so, it's like a dictionary, honestly. Fascinating. Guys, check him out. Tyson, thank you very much. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Come back anytime. Love talking to you. So
we will have you on again,
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Have a great day.
All right. You too.
Bye, my man.